Hello and welcome to the next episode of the e-commerce practitioners. Today I've got Emma Hoten-Pool with us, who's going to be talking to us the joys of the B2B and driving excellence in that space and how to bring the digital innovation in that world, which is supposedly considered to be a very old legacy world of B2B commerce. So it's going to be a fun episode. I'm quite excited to have you here, Emma. Emma, would be good if you can give us a quick introduction of your background and what have you been doing and how have you got where you are today?
Yeah, sure. Delighted to be here with you, Vikram. We've met a few times when we were starting to have some conversations around doing some digitalization of my B2B space. So it's really interesting opportunity to come and have a chat with you. I started in the B2C space. That was where I kind of cut my teeth in a company called Argos in the UK that at the time was really cutting edge, was blazing trails in everything. They had the best trading floor. They had the best marketing. They almost were claiming to be the first e-commerce platform for everyday people and everyday purchases. So that's everybody and was looking to them to compete and improve upon what Argos was doing. So I find myself very fortunate that in my early stages of my career, I was surrounded by best in class people working
Yeah, of course.
to do everything that they could do. So I learned a lot, mainly from a trading perspective, where it was everything was rooted in commercial. So whatever you did, it must have value. That value might not necessarily be monetary. It could be increasing customers in the short term to increase the long-term profitability of the business. So all of these really key commercial DNA parts, I would absolutely put at the door at working at Argos. And I then was lucky enough to be approached to work in the B2B space because
Brilliant.
in the UK, B2B companies were looking at what was happening in these big B2C companies and saying, this looks like it's the right thing to do, and we want to start to do it in our segment. So from there, I went to work for one of the large national builders merchants, Travis Perkins. I worked there for a few years, really which was my transition, I think, from the B2B to the B2C. Learned a lot. And what was interesting is that at that time, there were lots of people who had been brought in from B2C into B2B, and not many lasted.
How
So
was that transition and how did you find it? How did you adjust to that?
I adjusted better than a lot of people. There was an awful lot of really smart, clever people, and I've seen it over the last 20 years. It's still happening. People are being attracted by what the B2B is offering. B2B wants the learnings from B2C. They bring these people in and they just get frustrated. They don't get B2B. They don't understand why they can't take this cookie cutter model of what they did in B2C and just do the same in
Like that.
B2B. Yeah.
What were the primary differences that you saw or that you experienced from the world of B2C and B2B? Just
I
spell
would,
it out as a layman.
well, for me, there's two main things. So if you're in B2C and if you're in bricks, and the same thing has been transitioned over into e-commerce, it's either footfall or it's traffic to your website.
Absolutely.
The whole focus is the more people you get there, the more chance you've got of increasing your sales. In B2B, you've got loyal, steady, day in, day out relationship customers, and they're your golden nuggets. Now you're going to be really lucky if you can accelerate and put more and more and more and more on those. But that takes decades to build that level of loyalty. Whereas in for me in B2C, you can entice somebody in off the street through your door, or you can do something through digital social media that actually makes people interested in what you're doing. They come in, they click, they buy. They may never come back again, but you've got hundreds and thousands of people doing that, so you get your value. What you've got to do in B2B is really thoroughly understand the customers that you've got and understand how you can increase the basket of what they're spending with you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And what were the primary challenges that you experienced in the B2C world and problems that are different in the B2B world? How do you see that? And of course, customer acquisition is one element of it, but there
It,
are so many operational elements around it. the day-to-day running of B2C businesses, trading teams, and B2B trading, how is that different, and what are the typical challenges that you have encountered on your journey?
Well, it's whether or not it's just my experience in my career, but I've certainly noticed that the B2B companies operate much leaner. So when in the B2C companies I've been in, there's probably been 3 or 4 times the amount of people to do the jobs. And that has been primarily, and it could well be me reflecting on a period of time. I mean, we're talking 20 years ago, and technology is helping us, and which means that we can be more efficient and be leaner. There could be something in that, Vikram. But I think it's the pace of what you have to do in B2C has to be almost instantaneous to keep ahead of your competition, that actually you need more feet on the ground or you need more support from digitalization. Whereas when you're really working closely on relationships in B2B, you've got that core fundamental foundation.
Yes.
And throwing more people into it doesn't add the value that it does with B2B.
Yeah, that is indeed very true. Why do you think there's a huge gap in the overall digital or technology adoption in the B2C and the B2B world? Why do you think there's a huge gap?
I have a theory, not based on much evidence apart from what I've seen. My industry has traditionally been an older workforce. That older workforce has got a different acceptance of digitalization. They've perhaps have had 15, 20 years of not having it. I mean, when I started work, I don't think we even had computers. It makes me sound like a dinosaur. Yeah. But you were lucky if you had a computer. You know, you had your pad out and you went in and you negotiated with your suppliers and you faxed everything through. So I was brought up on that sort of technology, and I think it will change. It's got to change because you've got young people coming into the industry and they're moving up through. But the decision makers, the people who are still the core stakeholders, I think have their preferred traditional way of working, and that is picking up the phone and having a conversation with a person. Certainly in my B2B industry. Whether or not that changes and how we harness benefits of communicating in a relationship way rather than a almost a cold transactional way that you have more of in a B2C. Yeah. I think that's probably the challenge.
Absolutely.
There's different platforms that people are using. So, you know, text has got a lot more, there's a lot more of those that are going through our business rather than the phone calls. They're quick, you know, you just kind of, if it's where's my delivery or can I order, firing that through to their contact. That then equally gets fired through on a text to the end person who's going to then go through the process of placing that order or finding out what's happening with that delivery. The automation of that, the locking into the efficiencies that you can get from business automation, it's a huge opportunity. It's huge, but there's some hearts and minds in both companies and customers, I think, that you've got to overcome.
Absolutely. Now that you're talking about, digital adoption and everything, what do you think, in your opinion, are the biggest challenges in terms of bringing that digital transformation and that pace in the B2B world to get it more adopted much quicker and help businesses improve efficiencies? Because what I've seen is a lot of times there are initiatives that are kicked off, but then they literally go into a slow burner for multiple various reasons.
Yeah. And I've experienced that myself. I mean, you know me, Vikram, I'm a huge advocate of digitalization. I've been in businesses, B2B businesses, who have adopted it and have really forged a path with it. So I've seen it work and I know what it can deliver. I've also been in 2 or 3 businesses where they want it, but the cost of the investment means that they're really cautious because it's very difficult to see those benefits upfront.
Of course.
So in any other strategic initiative, I can do a trial. I can take a small segment. I can prove the concept. I can say invest 50,000 here. I'll do it in 3 stores. You can see it works, and then you've proved that the $500,000 investment is something that's going to work. It's all or nothing with tech. You can't really do a halfway house unless you're going to tell me differently. in which case,
Yeah.
brilliant.
No, of course. See, there is this concept called MVP, minimum viable product, which is extremely popularized, but a lot of times I've seen people misconstruing the meanings out of that word. I mean, if the objective is to get from one location to another location, you can't build four wheels of the car and get there. Four wheels of the car or just four doors of the car are not going to get you there. MVP would probably be a smaller mode of transport, which could be a bike,
Yeah,
which is
yeah,
at
or
least
skateboard.
exactly, or a skateboard for that matter.
Yeah,
But at
yeah,
least that, so, but a lot of times in the real world, when it comes to technology, people tend to misconstrue those words MVP and they start focusing on the doors and the wheels, which are not going to achieve the objective. And this is where I think it goes horribly wrong. They build a bad taste towards technology and then they become extremely cautious and fearful
yeah,
of it.
yeah, yeah.
Have you also seen something like that?
Yeah, definitely, definitely. And it also it depends who's got the largest voice in a company. So if a
Yeah.
company is really heavily influenced by an FD, I find it's more cautious than one that's influenced by maybe a CEO who's been in sales. The whole kind of culture of your exec is another really important thing in terms of the amount of risk that they're prepared to take to get those wins. And I think where I've been, where we've had a poor MVP and a heavily influential FD, has meant that things have come to not a grinding halt, but certainly walking through treacle.
Absolutely. No, I completely understand because FD would always look at it internally from an introspection perspective. But as a sales and marketing guy, I would look at the business from an output perspective, which is more customer centric.
Yeah, exactly that. And if you've got a balanced exec, where you've got equal stakeholders who are contributing and making it as balanced as it possibly could be, that's when really it works.
So, what has been your approach in terms of putting your case forward for making that technology investment into the businesses? What has worked in your experience? What hasn't worked?
I've been fortunate that I've had the opportunity to work in a B2B e-commerce platform that was really successful and entrepreneurial. So I've got proof, and I'm not putting forward a business case that's based in theory or based on something that I've read or a consultant has told me. I've seen it work. I've seen how personalization, segmentation, product life cycles, all of these sort of what you could call buzzwords.
Yeah.
But it works. All
Absolutely.
you're doing is actually making sure that what lands in front of that customer is exactly what they're looking for. And you
Absolutely.
can't do that without the digitalization to speed up your efficiency. You could do it with 100 salespeople. You don't have to do it through tech, but why would you when you can actually future-proof it, make it fast, make it efficient, make it right? You do it with digitalization.
What is your typical process, Emma, of looking at the whole digital transformation of a business? As I'm sure you've been into businesses where technology was already adopted to some stage, and there are different digital maturity levels for every business, right? So you've been through various organizations having various levels of maturity within the business. What is your typical process of approaching the whole digital transformation? How do you go about doing it? And what has been your best practice and success where you've got the best amount of success?
So my first thing that I do is how open are my customers? Because there's no point building something that customers are going to be equally cautious of.
Yep.
If it's not going to land, then I would have a watered down basic version of digitalization, which might be a really good searchable website. Whatever my customer base wants in that industry has to be the formation of what that digitalization strategy is. Now, there is a little bit of you don't know what you want if you've never seen it. There's a little bit of that.
Absolutely.
And I'm fully aware that I've often been in board meetings and I've thrown in, but everybody orders from Amazon. Everybody is ordering their shopping online. They all know how to do it and they all like it. Why can't we bring it into our industry? But there are some things where it's a little bit more complicated. So if you're in a B2B world where something's highly specialized or something is fabricated in a bespoke manner every time, if it's closely linked to, in my previous role, it was all to do with utilities and all to do with designs of of the water pipelines and the gas pipelines and the topography of the fields. Everything is a project plan that moves from day to day to day and has these changes as they understand more about the project. So that meant that you have to search for different efficiencies.
Yes.
And those efficiencies aren't necessarily transactional, they're probably service based. So how do you digitalize those services rather than your route to market? So there's a whole heap of things that has to be considered, Vikram, but ultimately it's how is your customer behaving? What is it that they're requiring, and how can you make their lives easier, which gives you that USP?
So would you go about interviewing or doing a small survey with a small customer base and capturing their requirements and understanding it better?
Yes, that's part of it. We have an awful lot of knowledge internally that you're probably not aware of as well. So there'll be how your customer's interacting with you, so you can map all that out. And if you map out business processes end to end and then sit and look at that to see actually which bit can we make more efficient, which bit can we help with digitalization, and then you can put that in front of your customers and test that verbally with them. Because actually, if you the amount of times you go to a customers and you'll say, what can we do to make your life easier?
Yeah.
It's such an open-ended question.
And
in the B2B environment, make your prices cheaper is normally what comes back. But that's not really what everyone, of course, everybody wants the best price. But
yes,
if you're working on a project in the B2B environment, you need the product to turn up on time when you say it's going to turn up. Because if it doesn't, then you've got men that
your product gets stuck.
Exactly. Everything gets stuck. You've got delays. You've got costs to that. It's such a wider thing than that.
No, absolutely. I completely agree, Emma. In fact, just today morning, I was talking to a friend who's again into the B2B space, and I was talking to him about technology adoption, digital adoption. I said, why does your business doesn't do it? It's a global business. And he said, the problem is we've built a digital website for our customers. We ask them to go and check their orders, place their orders. And they say, why should I be doing it? I can't even find my part numbers in your website. I have to search by your part number. I don't have time for that. I will just send you an email. You send me, if you want to sell to me, you have to do what I tell you.
Yeah. I completely get that.
Effort?
Exactly that. Yeah. And you're going to find that customers are going to eventually migrate to those suppliers who are going to make their lives easier. So,
exactly.
You've got to always not only think about what is it that the customers are needing now, you've got to try and forecast what those trends are going to be in the future, particularly as we get sort of the 20, 25-year-olds coming up through, and that they'll have a different understanding of how to transact, be it in a B2C or a B2B environment.
Absolutely. That's a very interesting perspective. And I think you've got a really good process, because the first thing is, a lot of times what I've seen is businesses tend to start documenting their requirements with what they think their customer wants without involving the customer in that process.
Yeah.
Which I think is a huge mistake. The first step should always be get involved with your customer. Ask them, and how are they wanting to interact with your business?
And the added complication that you've got with B2C is when you're dealing with larger customers,
yes.
you're talking to a multitude of departments.
Absolutely.
So you could get feedback from the salespeople that says, my customer wants this, but actually they're probably only interacting with you a tenth of the time. It could be that accounts are talking hourly, daily. They're having these conversations all the time. It could be that marketing has a different requirement. The logistical supply chain elements of goods in, goods out, very, very different to what a user of a product requires from a salesperson.
Absolutely. And I think these are mostly overlooked elements of any digital transformation. Either what I've seen is either they become 12-month project, which becomes already fearful right at the beginning. Nobody wants
especially when you've got 12 months to see return on that investment from your FD.
Yes. Or you don't spend enough time around it. So I think it's very important to do that contextually, find the right balance of agility and yet capturing the comprehensiveness of the information that you gather from your customers. I think that's very important. Now, Emma, how do you drive all of these digital adoptions and align that with your marketing team, sales team, accounts team, so to ensure that, everybody's moving towards one single North Star?
It's not easy. It isn't easy, especially if it's in a company that's not used to doing that.
Yeah.
What I've done previously and I'll be bringing into my current role is you've got to think differently. You've got to think that you're not in accounts and you're not in sales and you're not in marketing, but you're all touch points for a customer.
Yes.
And if you're thinking about it as a contact strategy as opposed to a digital strategy, then that kind of changes the scope a little bit, because then you start to have conversations around, well, when my finance department is contacting my customer's finance department, then what is that contact all about? What's that relationship all about? And what's that requirement? That then, when you're talking in that language, that helps other departments who perhaps have seen this as a digital as a standalone sort of marketing development that's all about marketing to customers and making sure we've got USPs.
Yeah.
It's so much bigger than that. It's about how we interact, and it's about how we leverage our relationships with every persona in every company and manage to digitalize that for efficiencies as much as possible. So the first thing I do is map that out so people can see it. So they start to sort of visually understand actually that all of these people interlock into the most complicated sort of spaghetti of it's not linear when you're having conversations with me. You would have, for example, you might do something on LinkedIn and you might be sort of promoting a service or whatever it may be. Somebody sees it, they contact a salesperson. That salesperson contacts the field user, who contacts procurement in the business, who contacts the ordering department in our business. And following that thread through for that lead generation to conversion is the bit where, for me, digitalization really, really works. Because without it, you're manually tracking everything along that journey.
And I think which is almost impossible. You really can't be manually tracking all of those touch points unless, and then you lose all that
You've
insight.
got emails, you've got phones, you've got texts, you've got verbal conversations. And how do you really thoroughly understand how close you are to closing that deal on that journey if you can't visually see it? And explaining all that to the different departments helps to break down the silos of seeing it as this is part of my job, or this isn't something that's important to me.
Absolutely, makes perfect sense. So it's basically around mapping out your customer side of journey. And of course, there's one part of it, which is customers buying journey. And then there is the whole delivery part of the journey, right? An account management journey as well, which is quite different from the typical buying journey. And of course.
Yeah, of course. Right? But I'll also, for me, there's the upstream piece as well. And of course, I'll say that because I'm in the commercial department. But if I haven't mapped out that procurement journey relating to the buying journey, then it all falls apart because you haven't got the stock and you haven't captured the trends. So for me, you don't start it with that buying journey. You're also upstream linking everything with your suppliers and your supply chain.
Indeed, very, very critical. Now, marketing in the B2C world is quite different from marketing in the B2B world.
Much easier.
Yeah, there is almost none. So can you talk a little bit about the marketing side of the B2B? How is it actually done? How do you go about doing it? I mean, in the B2C world, marketing is almost, I would say PPC has just taken over the whole side of marketing.
It is, yeah. Yeah.
Right. There's one side branding, but that other than that, rest of the marketing budget just goes to PPC. Yeah, everything else is literally minuscule compared to that.
And it's huge investment. It's massive. And when I was heavily involved with the e-commerce side, that PPC part for me was how do we make the most out of that investment? So it's not about, for me, it wasn't all about the return on the sales that you got for your investment. It was switching your mindset up for the profitability.
Yes.
So I was fortunate enough to work with a really, really good expert based in Germany who was so good at this, who was able to really clearly demonstrate that for 5 years, we've been patting ourselves on the backs, that we've been delivering some really good returns on our PPC. And she says, yeah, no, but you're not made any money. And you're like, well,
You're
it's so
selling at a
obvious.
loss. You're
Yeah,
selling at a loss.
it's so obvious because you're putting all your money in something that actually isn't your most profitable area by switching. And when you're working across different countries, and you start to layer in all of these elements of, well, actually, which one responds the best, which categories respond the best, which ones are which countries are going to be driving more of your profitability. It was a very, very different way of looking at it versus all of the agencies who were driving top line and not profitability. But to answer your question in terms of marketing related in B2B, the principles are the same. You're still talking about the life cycle of that customer. You're still talking about acquisition. You're still talking about retention, reactivation. But it's primarily got to be driven by data-based evidence. And in the B2B, I find that because they're a little bit behind the curve versus the B2C, that the accuracy of the master data is also behind the curve. So what you're dealing with is something that it's not been as important to have everything, all the boxes ticked, all the information, everything as accurate as possible and linked to that customer. But when it is, it means that you can actually start to understand when customers' behavior changes. So I'm a huge fan of RFM modeling to understand how customers are starting to change their behavior before they actually do, so you can catch it. And if a customer used to purchase from you once a month and now it's once every 2 months, then you know that there's something going on out there, that maybe they're starting to move away and you can catch it before it falls. Or if they used to be 100 grand a month, then they drop to 75 a month. Now, if you were to look at the numbers, they would still probably be in your top 10. And you could sit there and think there's not a problem, but you haven't noticed that actually that the trends are going down. So and when the trends indicate that customer is changing its behavior, that's when marketing steps in, because marketing is able to contact more of those customers than a single salesperson can.
Absolutely.
And for me, that feeds into that contact strategy. And it may be that the action that needs to take place when you decide on all of your tactics for all of these life cycle changes, it could be it triggers something to that salesperson to pick up the phone and go and talk and have a chat. Yeah. Or it might be that if actually you've noticed that there's 25 of your lower value customers who don't have that turnover that you want with your big ones, doesn't warrant that salesperson to spend that time with, but that's when marketing can step in and they can do something that's personalized, that's targeted, that can reactivate or can just catch before they fall. It can nurture them to greater order levels. When it works, it's an absolute dream, but it doesn't work without an awful lot of content building, prep work. Yeah, you're absolutely right. You can build a menu of 6 activation plans for marketing, and then something will happen, and that very quickly means that those are out of date. So you've got to have a marketing department that has the ability to generate content that can be personalized to a level that's sustainable.
Yep, absolutely. And talking about that, if I understood correctly, you talked about RFM model, that's recency, frequency, and monetary value, right?
Yeah,
Just
that's
wanted
right.
to be sure of that. Now, when we talk about the marketing side of it, so would it be fair to say that from marketing perspective, there are primarily only 2 channels from a B2B industry space, that is emails and potentially trade exhibitions?
No, I wouldn't say that at all.
What other channels would you be using?
So in my experience, trade exhibitions are becoming less and less useful. They are expensive to put on and attend for a start of. And you don't really guarantee that you're going to get the right customers that are going to come. And customers have started to not take them as seriously as they used to. Now, once upon a time, they were the only place really where you would do business for the year.
Yes.
People would come and I would attend as a customer, and I've been there as a supplier. And that's where you're really doing your negotiations. It's great because you can just knock out 10 or 15 all in one go. You're set up for the year and off you go. With that becoming less and less important, it means that there's got to be other ways where you're having those contacts. And I think that for me, probably about 10 years ago, I started to hear things like, well, if I'm hearing about it for the first time at a trade show, then I'm not a partner that I thought I was.
Yeah.
I should know about this before everybody else knows about it. And that was my first inkling that it wasn't the channel that it used to be. So certainly are extremely important for B2B.
Absolutely.
That's where you're sort of letting customers know what's going on. The social media is important. It is useful, is good. It depends on your industry. It depends on what it is that the message you're trying to get across. I find LinkedIn to be really useful because you can target and segment, and you can really hit your potential customer base as well as your current customer base.
Social media standpoint, don't you think a lot of B2B organizations tend to completely overlook social media altogether?
Yes. Yeah. Everyone I've been in so far said it wasn't for us until I introduce it, and then they see the benefits of it. And you can get converted leads from it. It's a no-brainer. LinkedIn for me is really good. It's being held. The professionalism of it is an unwritten rule that you hold sacrosanct, and you talk business on it.
Absolutely.
It's rare that it's become that whatever you would put on some of the other social media sites creep in, and it soon gets self-managed and stopped. So this is where you can start to build networks. You can start to see what's happening with forums. You can start to have a voice, and people can really start to see your thought leadership and credibility as a company. It's a long game, but it's one that I think is very important.
And again, just like social media, I think content is also very existing or almost non-existent practice within most of the B2B businesses. This content typically would sit inside your marketing department itself. Both these areas, why do you think that is the case, and where do you think businesses should start working towards this, and how?
I think it's people perhaps are a little bit scared because they might see that they represent their company. And so whatever they're saying, they might feel a little bit reluctant that it hasn't been seen, signed off, approved by somebody else talking the company language. I think that holds a lot of people back. But if you're visible and honest and professional, then actually you're reflecting where you work, and you're reflecting how you're going to do business with that customer. So it's about having trust in your people, and your people not letting you down with the content that they put on.
Yeah. And do you think businesses should also start establishing some kind of a content department, part-time, freelance, whatever, to start producing content which is more relevant for their customer base?
Then 100%, Vikram. And we can be a lot more efficient with AI. I think that's going to be a game changer. It used to be that you had 3 or 4 people who knew your industry and knew your business. And so it's hard to outsource this. It's really hard, because it's got to be something that's reflective of you as a business. I've tried using agencies before, and it's just too generic. It's something that I really, really fiercely advocate, but I'm also aware that it's that investment up front again. So you've got to prove the concept. What AI is going to enable us to do is prove that concept, because you'd still need people who are able to review what that content is that's being written, make sure that it's accurate, make sure that it's in your right tone of voice, but you haven't had to do as much of the hard graft and the prep work. So perhaps instead of having 3 or 4 people, you could have 1 or 2.
1 to 2. And make sure the content is relevant, has got enough depth, and of course hits the point with your customers and helps you nurture those customers as well, right?
Yeah, and one thing that I've repeatedly found with content, and again this was a difference where you had somebody who was flying in the B2C environment, and you could see that they really understood social media, and they really understood content, and they'd come over into the B2B, and they really struggled to understand the difference between patronizing your customers and telling them things that they've been doing in their day job for 20 years. Tell them something new. Don't tell them what they know. because then you just look like an idiot.
So very true. One thing more which I've found a very common practice in most of the B2B is that all the B2B organizations tend to put their portal behind a gated login. I mean,
Yes.
they could potentially publish their product catalog without the stock and price for general public, so that at least Google could scan that, scroll it, and make it available on the public websites. Don't you think this is almost like counterproductive to all your efforts for finding new customers? Instead of letting customers find you, you just don't want customers to find you in a way.
Yeah. And again, that goes back to understanding the purpose of what it is that you're trying to build. So if you're trying to build something that that helps your current customer base to be more efficient, and you want to provide really good services for them, then you build something that is behind and you log in with an account number, and
Exactly.
everything you've got is there. Absolutely. If you're wanting to acquire new customers, you also have to forensically examine what's the best channel to acquire those customers.
Yes, of course.
And is your industry actually Googling for whatever it is that you're offering? Because if it's more about word of mouth and traditionally reputation, where a customer's going to want to try you out, then it might not be the right way. There definitely is no harm in my book in demonstrating exactly what it is that you offer and making it really clear the brands you work with, the products that you supply, really sort of having it as your shop window. I'm a big believer in that.
Exactly. I mean, it's just like a shop window. Just let people window shop. You don't have to give them the price or stock. Make it ensure that, put it behind a login, that's fine. But just putting everything behind that gated login, I think you don't want to be found.
Yeah, it makes it, you could see it that it's almost like a private membership club, and perhaps the customers that you've got could like that because, that you're rewarding their loyalty by providing them with something that only they can see. I don't agree with that.
Yeah.
I think that's quite that's an easy get out, and I don't think it's going to add much value to your business.
I think in today's day and age, pretty much everybody does their own research.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
It's all there on a plate. You can find anything you want about.
Exactly. Everybody's going to do the research. So why not start looking at becoming a bit of an authority in your space at least? And you can't do that by hiding behind a locked gate.
Yeah. Yeah. And it has an awful lot of other benefits as well. So it's not just from a customer perspective. It can be for having new colleagues join you and understanding what it is that you're all about. It could be if you're wanting to build relationships with a supplier or a brand that you haven't actually got. They can come and see, well, actually, yeah, you're a credible outfit.
Absolutely.
This is what you're all about.
Absolutely. Because the moment anybody hears a new business name or they want to get into a relationship, the first thing anybody does is go to online and search for them. That's it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you got to own that rather than let somebody else write something about you, which goes on the above your website link.
Yeah. No, absolutely agree with that. And we were talking about channels as well, and PR in this space is something that works very well for B2B. So having a credible PR strategy, which is something that we've just started. We're working with a company who's been brilliant for us, really highly experienced in our industry, knows our industry, and that's critical. You've got to really make sure that they know the supply base, they know the customers, they understand what it is you're all about, and then you end up having a really good PR activation campaign.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Now, with all of these covered, one important question I want to ask was, Emma, what are key factors that businesses should look for when they're looking to scale their B2B operations? How should they go about doing that?
That's a good question, because I've probably experienced, if you've asked the question, what shouldn't they do? I could probably answer that.
Let's focus on what shouldn't they do. Let's twist it a little bit.
Don't rush, and don't spend money until you really, really have nailed down what's in scope, what's out of scope, what is it you're trying to achieve. The amount of times where I've come into a business where they've just spent 2 years designing, developing, spending money on something, and they don't like what they've got. It doesn't work for them because what they haven't done is that upfront preparation work. They haven't understood. They haven't included all the stakeholders. They've only taken it through perhaps one lens and not a multitude of lenses, and it's just not what they want. And that's a waste of time and a waste of money.
Very good advice. And on that note, I would also ask you one last question. What is the advice that you would give to leaders or people who want to become leaders into this complex world of the B2B space and in the digital side of it?
Never assume you know the answer, because you probably don't. You're surrounded by peers, and whether they're customers, internal or suppliers, who have all work in the same space. They all have something valuable to contribute. So take all of those little bits of jigsaw, put it together, and you'll have an umbrella of something that really will give you the best answer. But if you go in with your gut feeling, or this worked in my last place, or why can't we get this to work in B2B because it works in B2C, it's not going to work. You got to listen, you got to observe, and then you've got to pull all of those observations together, and you'll have the answer.
That's one invaluable piece of advice, Emma. And with that note, thank you so much for your time and sharing your valuable insights and experience on this podcast with us. Really appreciate that. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did.
I loved it. Yes, thanks for inviting me, Vikram.